Good morning, everybody. I'm Rick Bell. I'm the editorial director for Workforce, along with Josh Cameron, our chief strategy officer. And we are also introducing a guest for the very first time in a long time. I want to introduce Adam Taylor. He's the co-founder of Tenzo, which, Adam, my understanding is it's really disrupting the restaurant industry. Why don't you talk a little bit about what Tenzo is and what Tenzo does?
Yeah, sure. Hey, folks. So yeah, I'm Adam, co-founder of Tenzo. So we're really an analytics platform specializing in restaurant and retail. And fundamentally, there's now more data out there than ever, particularly as more and more systems move into the cloud. And we're trying to help really restaurant businesses take advantage of that and actually ultimately make more money. So we have a full business insight product, and we do specialize in forecasting and demand prediction. And so as we think about kind of this topic, we spend a lot of time thinking about how you can most accurately predict how much you're going to sell on a given day, and therefore how many people you need, and actually things even like food prep and waste too. So I'm a bit of a techie at heart, but I also come from a management consulting world. I spent a good chunk of my life at McKinsey. So
Nice.
so that's me.
Awesome. And so obviously we're talking about hospitality and filling roles in a high demand labor market. Josh, I'm going to let you take the wheel and kind of drive us through this presentation.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining, and thanks so much for coming on, Adam, and really excited to have your insight on some of the problems people are facing in hospitality all across America, and I suspect all across the world. So we can see here we've got some graphs. We might need your help to interpret these, but basically what we're seeing here is that as the economy is recovering from COVID and people are starting to come back, and we are actually starting to get some of this V-shaped recovery, unemployment is sort of going right down, and filling shifts is getting really difficult. We can sort of see that people have some concerns around COVID. I think these are sort of waning now. People have they're getting used to the idea of people are getting vaccinated, so they're feeling safe to come back to work. We still have some unemployment. We still have some unemployment benefits coming through until September, probably, which we're going to mention on the next slide. But I think the big impact that's really making things hard for everyone is just the demand has picked up so much, and we're really almost back to what we were before COVID. And just the number of people working to fill those jobs is not the same as what we had before. In terms of sort of the economic incentives that are at play here, we can see in Ohio, you can really make around $18.55 an hour just to stay at home. A lot of jobs are obviously paying less than that. So the economic incentives at the moment aren't making this easy. And that's sort of something that we're going to talk about today, is how to position yourself in a way that explains to employees that they will in fact make more than that by coming to work, as well as obviously the other benefits of working and the enjoyment that comes from that. This is the sort of signs we're seeing around the place. I think it's a good indication of the sort of the feeling in the marketplace and the feeling out there from employers, and about how difficult it really is to find people to work in a lot of these roles. Already mentioned this, but obviously the vaccine, everyone knows the vaccines in the US and in the UK have really been rolled out to a large extent now and are getting faster and faster. The restrictions lifted in Chicago last week. I think they're lifting in most major centers as we speak. So one of the interesting things that's happening out of this is we're seeing labor productivity really rise out of necessity. I saw some of the reports from last quarter suggesting there's like a 4% increase in labor productivity just last quarter alone. Like, people are, what does that mean practically? People are doing more with less. And if you walk into a restaurant, you're seeing this. When I first came to America 5 years ago, there used to be one server for every 2 tables. And these days we're seeing one server is handling like 5 or 6 tables, and just one person is doing the same amount of work as they used to. It's used to be done by many. So that's really having an impact on how we're scheduling things, how we're staffing things. And it's really one of the main things we're going to talk about today. All of the above, what we're talking about here is it's getting really difficult to fill shifts in the hospitality industry. We're seeing big increases in the wages that are being offered. On this next slide here, I've got a really interesting thing here. This was sent to me basically because my number used to be someone else's, and they'd obviously given their number to a fast food restaurant. And we can see here they're being offered a starting rate of $13 an hour, and they're reaching out to anyone who's ever signed up to their thing. Like, I've had this number for quite a while. So I don't think this person recently applied for this job. So we're seeing employers having to get much more aggressive about how they're trying to attract talent. They're increasing wages, they're increasing their outreach, and they're increasing a whole lot of things. So we're seeing that happen across the board. What else is this causing? People having to wait longer in line. Adam can probably tell us more about some of the statistics on this, about what happens when you don't have enough people to serve the customers that are there, and whether they hang around or whether they just leave. And that's obviously reducing revenue. So we've had both cost side ramifications and revenue side ramifications. I don't know if you guys have seen any of that in the data, Adam, or maybe you can add to that.
Yeah, well, definitely, and I think what is interesting is how people think about that, the difference between reducing cost and driving revenue, right? And I know we've got a poll on right now, so folks do click that. But I think it's I think historically a lot of people start by thinking about, hey, I want to reduce labor cost, right? And I actually want to take my cost out. But I think that increasingly people are starting to realize that actually the incremental sale can be much more important. So, rather than taking out 30% of your cost, you'd rather sell more at a 70% margin. And so we actually, we see the sort of conversation shifting so that instead of being about, hey, how can I take out this hour? It can be more about how can I make sure I've got that person working at the busiest time and knowing when it is. And so, I think we see that kind of shift in play.
Yeah, I think sort of what we're getting at here in a really simple thing is like people will only wait in line so long. People will only, like, there's limits on it. And if the constraints that are causing that is your labor, then I think that's one of the simplest ones to fix. Easier than if the constraint is an oven or a table or something like that. So I think that's interesting that you're starting to see that in the market as well. And definitely what we've noticed.
Definitely, and I think actually, in a strange way, in a COVID world, lines are not necessarily as appealing as they once used to be, because they suggest lots of people, right, and density, and actually, and I think folks are not necessarily at the point where they actually want to walk into a packed building, and so I do actually wonder if we're seeing slightly that people will walk away from a long line more than they used to.
Yeah, definitely interesting. Cool. So we already talked about that one. So some of the things we wanted to sort of start with is like, what are some easy ways, or what are the ways that people are trying to make their workplace more attractive for people to work at? So I want to run through a couple of these. I want to talk about tipping in particular, because I think it's really one of the main advantages we have in hospitality compared to when we're competing against Amazon for roles, or we're competing against other employers that don't have the same level of tipping. I think that's really one of the main reasons to work in hospitality. If you ask someone like, oh, why do you work in hospitality? The tips are great. Those are some pretty regular answers. And I think it's something that we can sort of emphasize more as employers in this space. So the first one I've got here is flexible arrangements. And this is some of the feedback we get a lot when we survey employees that are on our system about what's important to them. And certainty of hours is a big one. And we're seeing this, like the legislators in New York with things like Fair Work Week, and Chicago, that they're trying to give guarantees to employees around this in a legal way. But even if you're not in one of those places, it's still something that is attractive to employees, and people will need to pay rent. They have expenses and things. So if you can give your employees more certainty as to hours, that can certainly make it more attractive to work for you, especially when, as we see, the number of hours you are working impacts your entitlements to benefits and things like that. So I think that when we are in a labor shortage and we know that we do need people to work a lot of hours, giving employees more certainty around the number of hours they actually get, and probably implementing some systems that make that easier to do. For example, like in our scheduling view, if you if an employee has a number of hours that they want to work and it's their preferred level of hours, if they work under that, it can give the manager like a notification like, hey, this person hasn't been scheduled enough hours this week. Like give them some more hours somewhere. So that's kind of a simple one, and I like it because it doesn't really cost anything. This next one, all these next ones are really around things that may have a cost, or like that we are seeing that the hourly rate for employees is increasing across the board. So we've got some options where people are offering like a signing bonus, which was listed below. They're offering higher hourly rates, like we saw in that text message that was sent to me. People are offering $13 where they may have offered $9 in the past. We're seeing people offering shift differentials that they haven't in the past. So like a bonus for working a shift that's at an unpopular time, like maybe it's Friday night, it's really busy in the restaurant and everyone wants to go out themselves. So if you work that shift, you get more of a bonus. But the one I want to talk about most is just this tipping, how we can make people realize that, hey, if you do work as a server here and you've got more tables than you ever had before, the amount you're going to earn in tips is going to be more than ever. And some other things around that to consider is like the way you're splitting tips. Are the servers tipping out to the other people that might be even harder to find at the moment, the buses, the kitchen staff? How are you sort of handling that? And it's definitely worth looking at, and something that we can provide some more insight into how that you can sort of automate how some of that works and provide more transparency to employees around how that works, and so everyone understands why they're getting the tipped amount they did. So those are the main ideas we had around improving the way you're positioning your firm against all the other ones that are competing for the same labor at the moment.
Well, Josh, I think it kind of comes back to what, what Adam was saying, is that people are really going to vote on service with their feet. And if you are asking one server to handle 6 tables, and these tables have 4 to 6 to 8 to 10 patrons, it's like the service is just not going to be good. So you got to have your staffing right in order to service your customers. I mean, in the restaurant industry in particular. I mean, so we've seen a huge number of people leave the industry. In fact, one stat said that line cooks, more than 1/4 of the kitchen workers have permanently left the industry, according to a survey of 2,000 line cooks. So how do you fix that? I mean, you need to pay your employees better. And I seen on one of our polls that increased labor costs tends to be a big concern. Well, the fact is you're going to have to pay some of your people better. And there are on-demand apps now that I've seen to bring staff in. In fact, a manager may offer higher pay for last-minute workers. If a dishwasher's typical hourly rate is $15 an hour, through one of these apps, they may have to offer them $20 an hour because they just need to be staffed.
Yeah, this last-minute shift filling is a pretty interesting area, and the incentives that get offered for that, I think, are a big part of it.
Well, and also even bringing people in just for an interview. I mean, there's one person I saw quoted saying, "We will actually give you $50 in cash to show up for the interview." So I mean, it's at that point where it's just like, I mean, let's think about this too. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to kind of take over the conversation here, but it's like you had a lot of people after they were laid off. As the pandemic hit, and they went and worked elsewhere. My son is a fine example. He worked at Half Acre, got laid off, went to work in the landscaping industry, never returned. So it's like it's easy to blame unemployment benefits, but I think there are a lot of other factors. People went back to school. People went to trade school. People took on other hourly type professions. So it's not as simple as that. People, that one sign really just bugs me. And so I really do believe that there are a lot of other factors other than people just sitting on their butts at home watching soap operas and collecting unemployment.
Yeah, no, and I think we'll see the evidence of that as these benefits get wound down in September. That won't be an excuse anymore. I don't think it's going to magically result in all these problems going away. So I think now is the time to think about some of these things. And like Rick's saying, how like people have moved into other fields. How do we get them back? How do we position the benefits of working in hospitality properly? And I do think tipping is a big aspect of that. And just the day-to-day enjoyment of it.
But tipping is based on the customer satisfaction, right?
Yeah, definitely.
So if they're not being serviced well, they're not going to tip well.
No, 100%. Cool. So that's the first half. We want to talk about sort of things we can do in the space. The other part is like how can we be more productive? How can we, while we're working this out, while we're trying to hire more people, how can we sort of cause the least pain to ourselves and to our customers? And a lot of that is about really getting the right people working at the right time with the number you do have. And this is where we did want to bring Adam in a bit more, because his specialty is really in forecasting demand, especially in restaurant situations and hospitality situations. And maybe you can just run us through a little bit here, Adam, how you guys go about that and what you really do there. And like, there's no crystal ball. How are you guys doing that?
Yeah, there's not a crystal ball, but there's an attempt at one. I mean, look, I think there's clearly a lot of factors that go into into demand and how you can get that best predictor of demand. And we spend a lot of time. First of all, we want to just say we want to start from a point of how much are you going to sell, and then we could be talking about that at a daily level. But we could be talking about that even at sort of 15-minute levels, right? To then help you staff against. There are lots of factors that are going to be involved in that, in figuring out how much you're going to sell. And so, clearly looking at your past sales data is going to be an important part of that, right? So you're going to want to know how much you sell on Mondays compared to Saturdays. You're also going to want to be thinking about how much you sell in July compared to August, and there are going to be all sorts of trends going on as well. You may be in a general growth sector. You could be in decline, right? And so there are these sort of things to kind of a core of that demand forecast. There are then a whole bunch of other things that really impact your demand. One of the biggest ones we find is our events as a general category. But so holidays, clearly a big one, right? So whether it's Memorial Day or Labor Day, or whether it's Mother's Day and Father's Day, right? These are big generators of demand. But you may also have local level events that will impact things. And actually, if you're part of a larger brand, you could have marketing budgets and marketing calendars also that could be impacting demand as well. If you're running coupons and promos, they could be driving things in. Then really down to the micro level, you can get there are then lots of other factors that can influence demand, right? There could be something going on the street that means you've got less footfall walking past. You could have heavy traffic that means people are not coming off at the exit and going to the drive-through. And so you can start to layer in all that kind of stuff too. And really, like, the view of all of that is just getting to this prediction of how much you're going to sell. Then there's kind of a couple of important things that then you can do with that. I think though the first thing I would just say before you, so when you've got a view of how much you're going to sell, it's really important to make sure your team is bought in, right? And your team has come around that number. And so, and it's not just in Tenzel's case, it's not just like a question of the computer says the number is X, right? You need to make sure your team has gone, okay, right, we've all discussed, we've thought about it, and actually, we appreciate the computer's input, and we're going to refine that slightly because we know some other things, because you need that buy-in. And the buy-in is really important, from your general manager, assistant manager, yourselves, to make sure that everybody's kind of aligned as to what you're now going to plan around. And from a Tenzo perspective, we do that actually through mobile and push notifications so that we can start that conversation.
Something on the workforce side, Adam, just to chip in on there, is we're actually, now you guys could provide us the forecast, and if say it's the last minute they've just started digging a huge hole in front of the restaurant or something. And the manager can tell that this is going to not be a good thing. They can drag that down. They can drag the demand down. So they can sort of pick up these lines, these red lines that are the demand for the day, and drag that down so it doesn't end up impacting all of the figures. And you're 100% right. Making sure the managers have buy-in on this is just so critical. It's not really worth doing if they don't. So sorry to interrupt. Yeah.
No, I totally agree. And typically, we do a lot of benchmarking against kind of managers and simple forecasts, and we think we get sort of 30 to 40% less error, and we talk about forecast error quite a lot. But what's really interesting is if you give the manager like a better starting point, if you give them a 30 to 40% better starting point, they can go about 10% better again, right? So because they can layer in that local knowledge. But importantly, then you've got buy-in, right? And so then the manager's gone through, they've kind of said, okay, this is going to be my plan for the day. This is what I think I'm going to sell. And now I can build a plan around that. And so, and that, by the way, it also can be beyond labor. They can be thinking about prep and ordering and all that sort of stuff too. But from a labor perspective, then now you've got a sales number. You've got to think about how that sales number is going to translate into people. And there can be, and obviously there can be different ways to do that, right? You may have, baristas behind a coffee bar, and you may have chefs in a kitchen, and the driver of those two things are going to be different. You need baristas based off number of coffees sold, but you need your chefs based off the number of burgers you're making, and so trying to get underneath what that driver of labor is, so that then you can start to think about how many people in each kind of role you might need, is kind of the next step. And then you've got to fill those roles, which of course then gets to some of the earlier conversation, right? On are people, are you able to source talent and onboard talent and all that sort of stuff? So.
No, I think it's and pretty much everything that Andy spoke about there. We've got an ebook that's coming at the end. It really goes into a lot of detail around what he was discussing, and more so around the sort of the latter half of that, about once you do have a forecast of the demand, how do you then build the rest of the schedule around that to meet that? But why is that relevant here? Because a lot of what we're trying to work out is, okay, maybe we used to just have this schedule that had everyone working, the same amount of people working each day, or the same amount of people working in the morning and it's the afternoon. And what we can hopefully find once we look at this data better, that maybe we don't need some people to work some hours, but we need them. It's more important to have them in these really busy times. So that's the benefit of the forecast. We can get the right people at the right time, and ideally use the resources we do have as well as we possibly can. So that's really the aim and goal of it. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry to jump in, but I think that the busy time point there is just really interesting, right? Like I'm looking at these poll responses, and everybody's worried about lower customer satisfaction, and that happens at the busy times, right? It's when you're sitting in that long queue you can't get through, right? And by the way, that's also when the bulk of your customers are actually coming, all right? And so it is really important to think about that. When am I busiest times? How am I going to make sure I've got people for those busiest times? And the reality is you probably have a pretty good idea of them several weeks in advance. So you can. We've been talking about that, like predictability of scheduling and all that sort of stuff. And so the more you can be thinking forward and trying to get folks staffed in the busy times, I think is really important.
Cool. I think we kind of ran over most of this stuff. This applying the staffing ratios, that's kind of saying, okay, if I'm selling one coffee, how many coffees can one barista make every hour, or every 15 minutes? And that's really what we're talking about there. I think we've kind of covered this off pretty well, and I'm hoping everyone's understanding that. But if you do have questions, definitely throw them into the chat about how this would work, or how you might be able to get started with some of this in your own business, and we're happy to answer those. That's the main things we kind of wanted to cover today. If there is any questions, please let us know. If you are interested in a more in detailed guide to some of the things we spoke about, there is the white paper here. that you can access. If you have more questions for Adam, please feel free to pass them on to us or to reach out to Tenzo directly. We can really show how a lot of this stuff would work and how our two systems work together to sort of pass this data around and give you all of the insight from Adam's system inside in front of the schedulers so they can use it. If there's anything else that, if there's not any other questions, I think we can probably wrap it up. What do you think, Rick?
I think so. Yeah, so thanks to Josh and to Adam. Really appreciate you all being here with us today too. And keep an eye on workforce.com for upcoming webinars.